Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here today to talk about something that I think is topical and important for us, both as members of society, but also as key leaders in industry. That's a pretty good slide to start with because that shows you one of the solar panels that's recently been installed at our Agnew mine in the outback in Australia. Just to put that into context, that's about 950 kilometers northeast of Perth, and there's 10,000 of those panels installed over 8 hectares. So that shows you a glimpse of the journey that we're on. We're quite ambitious about what we want to do in this area. And I don't think it's inconceivable that in the mining industry over the next 5 to 10 years, we can make renewables possibly the base load of our energy supply. That used to be a dream, but it could be the front end of the start of a reality. And I'll show you in our presentation some of the reasons for my level of optimism on this. All right, so let's look at gold fields. I think if you see the context of what we are today, you can see some of the challenges that we face. We're a global gold company. We're around about number 7 in the world in terms of gold production, about 2.2 million ounces, going up to about 2.3 million ounces during the course of next year. We operate on 3 continents. We operate in 4 countries. Interestingly, here's a little bit of trivia that might be interesting for you to take away. We operate one of the deepest gold mines in the world. That's South Deep. That goes down 3 kilometers below the surface of the earth in South Africa. At the same time, we operate one of the highest gold mines, Cerro Corona, in the Andes in Peru, which is 4 kilometers above the surface of the earth. So I think that gives you an idea of the challenges. There's a 7-kilometer differential in vertical distances between the deepest and the highest. Soon, we're probably going to eclipse Cerro Corona as our highest mine as we make an investment decision over the next few months to build another mine in Chile, which will be at 4,700 meters above sea level. So it gives you an idea of what we've got ahead of us. Can you imagine how much energy you need to cool and ventilate a mine that's 3 kilometers down? The virgin rock temperatures are probably something around about 60 degrees. Okay. We can't put anybody in there unless we cool it down and ventilate it. And whether you produce 1 ounce or no ounces, in a place like South Deep, we're going to need about 60 megawatts of power just to cool and ventilate that mine, irrespective of what level of output we have. Gives you an idea of the challenges that one has in the industry. So if we look across the globe, we use 184 million liters of diesel. And most of that, of course, is concentrated in our large open pits we have across the globe. We use 1,300 gigawatt hours of electricity. Energy costs make up $300 billion a year of our costs. If you put that onto a per ounce basis, which is sort of what makes sense to me, it's close on $150 an ounce. And the one thing that we know about energy, it's growing exponentially in cost. The cost of energy in 5 to 10 years' time is going to surprise you on the upside. It's going to be a lot more expensive than what it is today. So we've got challenges from a business perspective that if we don't do something different on energy, we won't be in business over the next number of years. That's good in a sense, because it's going to force us to relook at our energy sources. It's going to force us to be more cognizant about carbon emissions and what we're doing to the planet overall. So just looking briefly at those areas across the world, West Africa, you can see in the middle there, that's almost half of our total energy cost. Not surprisingly, because that's all big open pits. Tarkwa, one of the largest gold mines in the world, produces about 520,000 ounces a year, and that's moving something like 85 to 90 million tons of material every year over a massive footprint so you can get an appreciation of the scale of the operations, the amount of diesel we have to use powering those trucks. In Australia, where we produce around about 1 million ounces a year in the outback, that is the second largest contributor, around about 26%. And then, of course, South Deep in South Africa, although it's only 8% of global gold production, takes 18% of our energy cost. That's a function, of course, of the depth of that particular operation. All right, so what are the challenges that are facing industry today and facing miners in particular? Mines are getting deeper. Mines are more remote. And I think for those people in the audience who are in the gold mining industry, they'll know that we actually have to go to far-flung places now to find the gold in the ground. We have to set up camps. We have to fly people in. We have to fly them out. We're often far from the grid. The mine that we're going to be building in Chile is 150 kilometers from the grid. So we can't rely on the national grid. Unfortunately, we're going to have to start with a diesel power station. But over time, we're going to move off that. Haulages are longer. The rock is getting harder. What does that mean if the ore is getting harder? It means we have to deploy more energy to crush it. We need multiple stages of crushing. We need to grind it more. And that costs money. That costs energy for us to do. In addition, ore bodies are becoming more metallurgically complex, more refractory in nature. What does that mean? It means conventional cyanidation doesn't liberate the gold from the ore. We often have to add additional processes, autoclaves, things like that, which require a lot more energy, require more cost in order for us to mine. So the reality is, if you look at the gold industry today, the gold industry is doing about 100 million ounces a year. We are progressively mining more and more material just to maintain 100 million ounces a year. We're stripping more in our open pits. We're having to access drives underground over longer distances to get to the ore bodies. All of that means if we do nothing, energy costs are going to continue to go up. That's even before the inflationary impacts we're talking about. Energy issues, of course, volatility, prices can go up and down. We've seen what the oil price has done over the last number of years. Availability, I've given you an example. We want to build a mine in Chile, but there is no grid nearby, so we have to have our own solution. And that's a clue to where we're going, is let's take control of what we have to do to make our mines work. Reliability of supply. If we look in South Africa, we know that the national utility is virtually insolvent. We know that it needs a bailout. We know that it needs to be restructured. But that is going to mean a lot of the base load we were relying on is no longer going to be available. We have to get our own bespoke solutions. And it's not just there. We're seeing similar issues in countries like Ghana, where the national grid was not maintained for years, and we ended up getting power outages, which was stopping our production. Tax and imposts. Often we're seen as captive customers, where indirect taxes can be added onto our energy costs because we have to use that energy. There's no other alternative for us, so the cost tends to go up as well. Lastly, we're seeing from the investor side, ESG arms or the various institutional investors are demanding more answers. They're asking for information. They're asking how are we going to make our contribution to reducing our carbon footprint. Regulators are also waking up to the realities of what we have to do. They are going to drive the agenda going forward for us. There's another issue, though, for us to think about. Often climate change is spoken about in the context of, well, what are you doing about it? How are you making your contribution to reducing your carbon footprint? Now, we know that the best way we as miners can do that is let's use less energy and let's change the sources of our energy away from a more intensive type of energy in terms of carbon output to less intensive, and then just reduce the absolute quantum of energy we use. If we can do that, then we're going to reduce our carbon emissions. At the same time, how do you sell that to thousands of people in the business? For example, we have 7,000 employees in our business. We have 18,000 people who work for us, including our contractors. If they can see that in order for us to be sustainable as a business in the long term, we have to change how we manage our energy. And at the same time, we can actually make our contribution to reducing our carbon. But the other side of it is that climate change is having an impact on our business. One of the things I've noticed over the last 5 years, and you've probably seen it too, is droughts are more severe. Floods are more severe. We're getting 1 in 100-year floods now almost every other year. Now, 10 years ago, that didn't used to happen. And you're seeing this kind of issue all over the world. What does that mean for us? Well, it means our operations are going to be impacted. So we're going to need to mitigate. We're going to have to get adaptation measures in place so we can deal with that. So if we don't think about climate change and its risks, our business is going to be impacted as well. 3 of our 4 regions that we operate are water scarce. And the little water you have in the outback in Australia, most of it is hypersaline, so you can't even use it. You can't use it unless you treat it, RO plants and things like that. Okay, and we're seeing in other countries too, South America, we're seeing South Africa. We're going to be water negative as a country in those areas. So we have to figure out what we're going to do to help that situation. Financial risks I've talked about as well. We are going to see an exponential increase in energy and probably water over time as supply-demand balances get out of step. We've also seen disruptions to supply chain with bad weather conditions. We couldn't get our concentrate to the Pacific coast in Peru because of weather conditions. A road was washed away, and we had to wait for an alternative road to be put in place before we could get our product down to the coast. So it shows what climate change can do for us too. Carbon taxes are happening. They're a reality in some countries. I think we're seeing that pricing carbon is becoming more in vogue, and I think we're going to hear more about that as well. And also, as we've said, there's demand for more information to be disclosed. We've just put out our inaugural report on the financial disclosure on climate change, the so-called TCFD report. That's just come out a couple of months ago. And I think we'll find that more and more people will be asked to give this kind of disclosure in the future. Right, so if we took a look at mining, what does it mean for us? I think broadly, depending on which industry you're in, energy is going to be anywhere between 10 and about 40% or so of your costs. It must be said in gold mining, we are less intensive than other mining industry participants. That's probably because we don't have large downstream smelters, etc. But the truck fleet across the world, here's an interesting stat for you to take away during this conference. The global truck fleet around the world is emitting about 68 million tons of carbon every year. That is huge. Now, that sort of tells us the pressing need to try and find electrification solutions for our fleet is key. And what I can say to you is, through the ICMM, the International Council of Metals and Mines, we formed an advisory group between ourselves as the mining industry and our suppliers of equipment, the OEMs as we call them. We've set up an advisory group, and we're now formalizing what we need to do with what they can give us. I'm on that advisory group myself. There's 3 CEOs from the mining industry, there's 3 from the equipment manufacturers, and we're starting to map out what we need to do. And I'd like to believe, certainly, that within the next 5 to 10 years, the vision of moving away from diesel-operated equipment could be a reality, particularly underground. I think we have to start underground because of the risks of things like diesel particulate matter, emitting diesel in confined spaces underground, is concerning, even though we have good ventilation controls. There's a pressing need to start there, but we need to move this into open pits as well and make our contribution towards reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over time. So that's going to be, in our minds, a pressing need for us. For us, energy spend makes up about 20% of our costs. And if we do nothing, here's the other scary thought that we've debated internally. If we do nothing, that cost is going to go up probably to about 30% over the next 5 to 7 years. I don't think we're alone looking at other companies with similar challenges. I'm sure that they'll be thinking about the same stuff. So if we look at our emissions, 29% of our emissions are from our diesel trucks, and the other 60%, which is the bulk of the rest, is from various sources of electricity that we buy in. And therein is a challenge too. If we can move off these national grids, if we can come up with bespoke solutions for ourselves, we can make a difference here. Now here's an example of the issue we have. If you look at the bars, that gives you an idea of the energy we're consuming. I think if you just look at the tons mined line, which is the green line, you can see tons mined are going up. We have to mine more tons to get the same ounces. And of course, your energy cost we're seeing in red. The only reason that's come down over the last few years is because of the oil price. But as you can see, it's starting to go up as well. So our journey, 10 years ago, we decided we needed to do something different on energy. And our journey is split into 3 different parts. First of all, let's integrate it into the business. Let's get 7,000 people thinking about energy and climate change. Let's baseline what we have, and let's set targets and start with disclosure. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that took about 4 or 5 years to embed into the business. As we all know, changing a business is not easy. You've got to get all the heads in the right direction. That takes time. Then we said we've got to worry about security of supply. Are we going to have energy? Ghana, for example, we realized if we carried on the way we were going, we weren't going to have energy. We had to get off the grid. So we came up with a solution that would have our own gas stations on site. And that took a number of years to put in place, but thankfully I can tell you now we are off the national grid. And that is for a large offtake supply. So it can be achieved with the right vision, with the right determination to succeed. We then had to look at our climate change assessment. Where were we? In other words, what is the impact of these severe climate events on our operations? What strategies can we put in place to mitigate, to adapt to it, and to ensure the safety and health of our people? And then we started looking at renewables. And I would say over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a tremendous step forward on renewables as the cost of conventional energy has gone up and as the cost of renewables has started to come down. Where we are now and where we're going into 2020 and beyond, we're already starting to see renewables. It's happening. The pace of change has picked up. I would say in the next 5 years, we're going to be in a very different space than where we are today, even in 3 years' time. You're having this conference at a very important time when things are going to be changing. We have set a carbon energy reduction target. We want to take over 50% of our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions away within 4 years. 800 tons of carbon. Doesn't sound like a lot, but imagine if every mining company had a target and it went for it. You're going to make a big difference to the world, and you're going to make a big difference to your own cost base in your business. So our strategy really has 4 pillars. It's energy efficiency initiatives. You can always do a lot more. You can reduce energy today without changing the solution. You can deploy more efficient fans underground for ventilation. You can switch off compressors you don't need. You can stop some of the wastage. You can move to a more on-demand type of energy management strategy. Increasing renewables in our mix. We've said every new mine that will now be built must have at least 20% renewables as a base. Having targets for carbon reduction. We've set a target, and I think we're going to come pretty close. and then embedding the best practice and systems. So we've signed up for ISO 50001, and we've already had one of our mines certified. And I'm sure during the course of 2020, we'll have some more done as well. I've talked about our Scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and I've talked about our target of reducing by 800 tons over 4 years. Now, as we speak, we're about a third of the way there, and we believe, based on the latest action plans we have in place, we are going to be around about 80 to 90% there against our aspirational target. And when we put this target out there, everyone thought, gee whiz, this sounds very optimistic. Are we going to be able to do this? I think we're very close to achieving it, and we're going to have a good crack at going beyond this. What are the different measures? If you look at the pie chart, process optimization, just doing the things you're doing now, just doing them better is going to save you. Look at the switch from diesel to gas. So we've taken the whole of Australia onto gas, 100%. We've taken Ghana up to 93%. So you changing from a more intensive carbon emission to a less intensive carbon emission. Already that makes a difference, and it's a reality today. And we're talking there about essentially 65% of our business has already been converted to gas. So it's quite meaningful in the context of our company. So some of the stuff that we've done over the last couple of years, 150 megawatts of gas power plants have been installed in the group. This has all been done really over about 4 years. 40 megs of solar under assessment in South Africa. We're waiting for permitting approval from government. Once that's in place, we're going to build a 40 meg solar plant around South Deep, which will provide about 20% of its energy needs. Now imagine if we can get more battery life. That can increase again, and that's one of the key enablers to the next step. We've got 18 megs of wind power under construction in Western Australia. I've got to tell you, people in the outback in Australia have never seen these wind turbines on the back load of a truck. This has actually caused quite a stir because they have to come all the way from Fremantle, which is the port, all the way to the mine. And we're starting to see people say, gee, these wind turbines, when I go on holiday to Europe, I can see them. Never thought I'd see them here in the outback. Well, now you're going to see them in the outback. And I think if we can get it right as a company, we're going to raise the bar for everybody else. Battery storage under construction as well. 275 kilometers of gas pipelines buried, which is great because you don't see it in the environment. And as I mentioned earlier, Cerro Corona in Peru is our first mine that we've had certified under the new standard. So I want to just show you a couple of case studies. It's always good to talk about what you want to do. Let's talk about what we have done and what we're busy with right now. Agnew in Australia, here's a good example of getting off the grid. This is what we call essentially a microgrid. We're going to have a multiple solution of different energy sources. We're going to have gas, we're going to have wind, we're going to have solar, we're going to have battery. And the way this is going to work as a microgrid is we are going to figure out what's the best mix of power to use. We can switch from different power sources. That's the main reason we got the battery, is if the wind is not working, solar's not working at night, of course it doesn't work at night, we can go back to the gas, come off the gas, get back to the renewables. We've said over life, over half of the total energy mix for Agnew in Western Australia will be with renewables, 57%. 5 years ago, you wouldn't have thought this was possible. And I think that's conservative. With additional innovation on battery storage, we can probably take that to another level. And that's going to reduce 40,000 tons a year of carbon. Granny Smith as well, we're putting in a solar field that's double the size of Agnew. 20,000 panels at Granny Smith. At Agnew, we're going to have 10,000 panels. The footprint, 8 hectares for Agnew, 16 hectares for Granny Smith. So these things are happening as we speak. And with these panels having the ability to be double-sided, I think we're going to get more out of the solar over time. So there's a case study of what could be achieved. If we look at Solaris Norte in Chile, we'll start building that next year. The one thing I noticed when I drove up to the mine site, I saw a lot of solar around us. So the conditions are ideal. If you look around the world, this is one of the best places to harness solar. So over time, I'm very confident that we can take Solaris Norte to probably over 50% solar, if not higher in time. And that's going to have a good business benefit. You can sell it to people because you're going to get a payback. In addition to reducing carbon, it's good business practice. South Deep, I've talked about the 40 megawatts that's currently under permitting, and that'll be a great addition as well. It'll take pressure off the national utility, and it'll reduce our cost over time. All right, and then looking at Gruyere, which is the latest mine we've added to the portfolio in Australia. That has been configured from the get-go with a 48 megs gas power plant. Because it's so remote, we are linked up to the grid. We had to put in 200 kilometers of gas pipeline that's buried. We linked that back to the overall grid of gas. So now it's linked up to that, but that's just the start. The next challenge for our team is come up with some renewables as well. Tarkwa in Ghana, we've come up with 40 megs of on-site power stations. We'll be completely off the grid in what we call island mode before Christmas time. That takes pressure off the national utility, reduces our costs, reduces our carbon intensity as well. And we've just completed another pipeline as well, so we can avoid trucks going on the road, because that can create a safety and health problem. We don't want gas trucks going up and down the road. So now we've got a pipeline. Again, it's buried. Nobody knows about it. Communities aren't worried. We're not going to have accidents. That's the last thing that we want. All right, so just summing up then, I think the big opportunity going forward is electrification. You know, you've seen we use 184 million litres of diesel. You've seen that the global industry puts out 68 million tons of carbon from its mining fleet. This has to be one of the key issues we got to get right. So I hope in your conference you spend a bit of time talking about this. I would see this as the next big catalyst. Unfortunately, it's not a year away. It's probably 3 years or 5 years away. But we've got to push this. And we've got to make it an imperative. Gas has been a very important transition fuel because it's lower in intensity in terms of its carbon emissions. So it's helped us to get off the heavier carbon emissions, but it's not necessarily the end game for us. We want to have a diversified mix in the medium term that is modular and connected, whereby we can continue to move different energy sources around in terms of the mix. But the end game has to be that we get more to renewables, both as a mining industry and as industry at large. And if we can make that an objective, we can change the world in the next 20 years, and we can do it in a way that is sustainable for business. More battery storage is going to be fundamental for us, and I can't emphasize the need for us to address that as a way of increasing our renewables, in particular solar. All right, so energy costs will continue to go up. For those who want to do nothing, they won't be in business in 10 years' time. Because if you think of around about a 10% escalation in cost every year, in 7 years your costs double. That's what you're going to have if you do nothing. So there's a business imperative. There's an imperative for us to make a difference as an industry to what the world needs. Renewables make good business sense, and it's the right thing to do. Now, for the younger people coming into our business, one of the questions we get asked is, well, what is your energy strategy? What is your carbon strategy? What are your carbon targets? If you don't have those answers clear in your head, they're probably going to go down the street and go and work for somebody else who thinks more seriously about these things. Those, I think, are probably the key messages I want to leave with you today, and I wish that you have a good conference, that you have good dialogues, good debate, and that we can take it to the next level. Now, if technology permits, we're going to show you in the last minute or two a video of what we've done. Thank you.